This is understandable politics. Today, about the dark side of the British military. Bloody special forces, how the air service executed peaceful Afghans, for reports. There are witnesses, documents, emails, and even military confessions. But after 10 years, the investigation is either closed or stalled. The ugly side of the bloody mission, cold-bloodedly torturing and killing unarmed prisoners, systematically and methodically. But the Crown gets away with it. So Afghanistan, the British military supposedly fights the Taliban. The contingent peaked at around 10,000. In reality, the occupiers spare no one and carry out massacres among the civilian population. In August, 2 children aged 1 and 3 were shot, and their parents were killed during a night raid by the SAS. The family was sleeping in their yard. 2 months later, another SAS unit shot 3 young people aged 12, 14, 16, and an 18-year-old while they were drinking tea in a room during a night raid in Lawlessness, Helmand. Another batch of scandalous revelations is published by The Times, one of the most famous newspapers in the world, and it reminds us, over the years, a huge amount of evidence has been collected regarding war crimes. Why are the guilty not punished? In a statement published in the investigation materials, it was also indicated that men of conscription age were killed right on the premises after being detained using various methods. In one case, it was mentioned that a pillow was placed over the head of a person who was shot with a pistol. It was assumed that the deceased would be photographed next to weapons that the conscription age men might not have had at the time of the killing. It was claimed that SAS soldiers placed weapons next to the bodies of their victims to create the impression that they were armed and that the soldiers shot them in self-defense.
It all started many years ago with the testimony of a high-ranking Special Forces officer who oversaw special operations. He turned in his subordinates, informing the police that SAS soldiers under his command committed war crimes by killing prisoners in Afghanistan. The officer, known only by the code number 466, told the police about the location of documents proving the horrific deeds. He claimed that their crimes were so serious that the entire regiment needed a radical overhaul. Meanwhile, other Special Forces commanders were aware of the mass executions, including children, but did not report the killings.
Emails and military testimonies indicate that British Special Forces killed hundreds of civilians in Afghanistan. Here are excerpts from just one transcript of a conversation with a SAS soldier. In an interview, he said that his unit killed over 300 people in 6 months of their tour, mercilessly beating them every day without stopping to clear Helmand of suspected insurgents. Honestly, I was like a damn kid in a candy store, he said. He said taking prisoners was useless because they would be released a few days after being handed over to the Afghan police. So he admitted that he and his colleagues regularly shot unarmed Afghan prisoners and planted weapons on their bodies. The commander's introductory instruction was to kill, capture, and nothing else. Kill, capture, and that's exactly how we operated, he said.
The practice of these war crimes was quite systematic, as representatives of the Taliban repeatedly stated during the war, while the war was still ongoing. There were complaints from various justice organizations, including in Britain, the USA, and Australia, about the presence of fascist symbols, shootings of civilians, various strikes on weddings, processions, and residential houses. These are just separate unprovoked acts of violence, rapes, and child murders. It's important to understand that what is in the press is just what has become known, since none of the defense ministries, neither in Britain nor in the USA, sought any serious investigation of these crimes.
British media have raised the alarm before. 2 years ago, the BBC conducted an investigation. At the center of the scandal was just one SAS unit during a single deployment to Afghanistan. From November 2010 to April 2011, but there are so many facts that it makes your blood run cold. Journalists claim that the military even competed with each other over who killed more civilians. These are bullet marks. So these are bullet holes? Yes, they shot at the nearest ones. My son was shot at close range, in that corner of the room. In this Afghan's house, 9 people were killed, shot while lying on the ground. At least 2 bullets, to the head and heart. One shot was in the corner of the eye, another in my father's chest. In 6 months, the squad took the lives of hundreds of Afghans who were declared terrorists. The filmmakers claim that at least 54 of them were killed illegally.
According to journalists, the elite special forces cold-bloodedly killed unarmed people during night raids on peaceful Afghan homes. It is emphasized that the figures given are just the tip of the iceberg, and in reality there were many more killings. The filmmakers visited some of these places. Bullet holes indicate that the fighters shot at people lying down. Among the victims were teenagers aged 15 to 16.
In reports, SAS officers tried to hide the inconvenient truth, claiming that Taliban terrorists threatened with weapons, suddenly pulling out a grenade or an automatic rifle. But the investigators say there were far more killed people than weapons seized at the scene. This suggests that the SAS shot unarmed people, and that SAS operatives could have falsified evidence by planting weapons at the scene after killing people. According to the BBC, a high-ranking Special Forces officer expressed concerns in a secret memo that this might be a deliberate policy of illegal killings. This refers to the intentional killing of young men of conscription age. Considering this, one comes to think that the British were committing absolute lawlessness in Afghanistan, simply killing civilians to show good reports. In one of the world's leading democracies, an investigation should have immediately started. And of course, the military criminals should have been punished. But in Britain, it turned out quite the opposite. The authors were accused of, quote, putting the military at risk. Despite such confessions, all this evidence is supported by anonymous testimonies from SAS fighters themselves. One of them told the Daily Mail that the truth would shock everyone. Another openly admitted that illegal killings were part of our job, and yes, the tactics were terrible. But arresting them was quite pointless because they had to be released a few days later. So, from my point of view, the end justified the means. As for what goal required killing unarmed people, the Britain decided not to elaborate. The Ministry of Defense tried in every way to disrupt the film's screening, and when it failed, it issued an angry tirade. They said all the presented evidence had already been investigated and found not to support the accusations. The Guardian wrote absolutely correctly in its editorial column. Any decent prime minister would have started an independent investigation into the claims that British soldiers, especially those from elite units, committed war crimes. But Britain has Boris Johnson. So what kind of decency can we talk about here?
The scandal seemed to be hushed up, but new accusations surfaced last year. Another investigation was published by The Guardian. Lawyers representing the families of the deceased stated that at least 80 civilians were victims of 3 elite special forces units operating during the occupation of Afghanistan from 2010 to 2013. Afghans were repeatedly found killed in or near their homes after night raids by special forces.
According to The Guardian, one of the Special Forces soldiers personally killed 35 Afghans in one 6-month tour as part of a supposed policy to eliminate all men of fighting age in residents' homes during raids, regardless of the threat they posed. The new accusations are contained in a document presented by the law firm Lee Day. They studied emails from senior officers of that period. In them, the military warned that, quote, there is a clear disregard for human life.
Britain here repeats the same position as the USA, which essentially ignores any calls for an international investigation into their war crimes, and accordingly, again, completely undermines any role of the ICC. In investigating these crimes, it is naive to expect that any international bodies can bring Britain to account for the crimes of their soldiers. So one can assume that some of the most egregious episodes will be conditionally investigated, and maybe even some will be found guilty. But this does not mean a full investigation of all the crimes committed during the occupation.
For 10 years, the British Special Forces have been under the sword of Damocles due to bloody massacres. But as soon as the topic resurfaces in society, the story always gets a very interesting continuation. This time was no different. After lawyers presented new evidence and things started to heat up again, the military began covering their tracks. In the framework of a new public investigation, lawyers are trying to get to the truth. But when they got close to getting answers, it turned out that the sought-after materials were destroyed. Directly violating the given order, staff of the British Special Forces headquarters irreversibly deleted an unknown amount of data from this server shortly before investigators working under Operation Northmoor arrived to check it. So once again, the elite of the British troops simply took and deleted all the data from departmental computers, including the main server. All that could confirm the mass murder of innocent civilians. And this despite the fact that SAS commanders were ordered to preserve all data on Operation Northmoor until the arrival of Royal Military Police officers. The British press is shocked by such lawlessness. The Times and The Guardian published the results of media investigations, which indicate that SAS commanders destroyed data from computers to hide evidence of the killing of 80 civilians in Afghanistan from 2010 to 2013. The commanders violated the order and instead irreversibly deleted an unknown amount of data from their main computer server, writes the newspaper, noting that the commanders were ordered to preserve computer data until the visit of Royal Military Police officers. But such tricks are not new in this case. The Royal Military Police have already tried to get to the truth. Evidence mysteriously disappeared. It turned out to be a tough investigation. It is reported that one Afghan serviceman who witnessed the shooting was killed, and another had brain damage. The Special Forces reconnaissance video from the scene was overwritten, and when investigators tried to recover it, a hard drive error surfaced. One frustrated investigator commented, "How can so much go wrong in one aspect?" And now British justice is going in circles again. A full investigation into the killings of peaceful Afghans supposedly began in the fall. Most of the hearings, at the request of the Ministry of Defense, will be held in secret, without the presence of journalists and the public. Mansur Aziz, whose brother and sister-in-law were shot while sleeping by British elite troops during a night raid on August 6, 2012, said he hopes the investigation will determine why his home was targeted. Two of their children were also shot and wounded. And Aziz said that he and the surviving family members want to know the truth. In a statement released through his lawyers, he said, "We ask the court to listen to these children."
The commanders of those soldiers who participated in such incidents often cover for their subordinates out of corporate solidarity. This happens very often, and they cover up, pursuing not national interests, but primarily narrow corporate interests. Those very corporate military groups involved in missions abroad. And it often happens that they try to hide the ends in water, cover up, or simply destroy the traces. Witnesses disappear or retract their testimonies. It is clear that they have been worked on well. or evidence that was previously properly obtained, properly seized from the crime scene, and properly documented, suddenly disappears. And suddenly they are gone. This happens often.
All this looks like a banal scam. The public is outraged, and investigations begin to let off steam. But there is still no result.
The first attempt was made back in 2014. The British police began investigating a number of other similar murders. But after 6 years, it was simply shut down. The military police concluded that the special forces did nothing wrong. Victims of British lawlessness fear that even now the case may be hushed up, despite the egregious crimes.
The documents include a police statement from 5 British soldiers about war crimes committed by the SAS, testimonies from SAS commanders, emails warning Downing Street about the killings, and investigators' diaries. Internal emails between detectives investigating the SAS killings indicate that their investigations were thwarted after they were reported to Downing Street. The Prime Minister was David Cameron, who is now the Foreign Secretary. According to one of the emails, the chief police investigator complained that he was under political pressure to stop investigating senior SAS commanders. Afghans who lost entire families naturally disagree with this approach. They initiated a judicial review, claiming that the loss of their loved ones was the result of a policy of extrajudicial executions. 4 members of Saifullah's family were killed during a night raid on February 16, 2011. Another family member said
что мы потеряли все, когда произошел инцидент, и что с тех пор им снились кошмары. На следующий день после того, как были убиты члены семьи, сержант-майор САС описал этот эпизод как последнюю бойню в электронном письме, обнаруженном во время судебного рассмотрения, что дает основание предполагать, что этот эпизод не был единичным инцидентом.
Но Лондон плевать хотел на голоса пострадавших. Политика прежняя, своих не сдаем. Более того, власти приняли закон, который, по сути, разрешает творить беспредел в других странах.
Британский парламент принял закон, который фактически освобождает от ответственности военных за преступления, совершенные во время зарубежных боевых операций. Даже The Guardian вынуждена признать, лейбористы не сделали достаточно для того, чтобы противостоять этому закону. Великобритания неохотно преследует собственный военный персонал. Это подтверждает британское правительство, считает, что жизни иностранцев не имеют значения.
Любопытно, что в начальной версии документа военным всех уровней вообще прощали любые преступления против гражданских, за исключением особых случаев. В окончательной редакции подсудным признали сексуальное насилие.
requests, despite public protests, will not be punished. This law will only reinforce the opinion that the authorities are deliberately pursuing a policy of permissiveness. It undermines the UK's traditional commitment to fundamental norms of international humanitarian law and human rights. The British Special Forces are not in the center of a scandal for the first time. Soldiers have been accused of crimes in Iraq and Syria. The Afghan story apparently is not the last one either. Death squads are consulting and training Ukrainian soldiers. One can imagine what they are being taught. In general, one's own force is closer to the body, even if its hands are elbow-deep in blood. Who will punish it, especially in the service of the United Kingdom? Goodbye.